Guys and gals, and welcome. Welcome. You know what today is? Today is Patch Notes Day. My little patch notes. A lovely little patch notes. Do 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 do. I love you. Ba-da-bum. Da-da-loo. Da-da-lee. Do 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 do. So patch 1.33 is now live. If you guys want to hop on with me, and we're gonna go over them today. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do some patch notes. I give people a little bit of time to get in here before we get started. But we're about to start. We're gonna go over these patch notes and we're gonna talk about all the changes and whether or not we like or hate them. Let's put a poll up too. I was waiting for him to pop up. I love making a poll that has all the same answers, but slightly different variations. I especially like adding a your mom option to the list. It's always important to me. If I don't add a your mom option, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I have to add a your mom option. I mean, it's just that's just how it works. It's just the way it goes. This is the Wheaties. All right, let me get a water. Because I know my throat's gonna be dry reading off 18,000 patch notes. I know I'm gonna have a dry throat over here. All right, you guys ready? Are we ready for the patch notes? Are we ready for the patch notes? Are we? I don't think we're ready. We're not ready. That's okay. Developers notes: the select vampiric powers from Season of Blood have returned with some tweaks to make their power level fit into the Season of the Construct. These powers will be available as legendary aspects in all world tiers and in both the Eternal and Seasonal realms. Bringing back the vampiric powers. Of the Accursed Touch, lucky hit up to a 20 to 35% chance to inflict a vampiric curse on enemies. Enemies afflicted by vampiric curse are also vulnerable. Vampiric curse stored souls deal 20 to 50% increased damage. Of Metamorphosis, when you evade, you turn into a cloud of bats. I know a lot of people are excited about this one coming back because this represents a basically a return of the Unstoppables, right? So like everybody can get their own Unstoppable now for 2.5 seconds every single time they evade, which is pretty neat. So becoming unstoppable for 2.5 seconds. Enemies along your path take physical damage and are inflicted with the vampiric curse. Evade cooldown is reduced or increased by 5 to 10 seconds. So what they did to kind of balance this out a little bit was increasing the evade cooldown, which I'm actually kind of worried might actually be pretty legit because the Juggernaut armor also increases evade cooldown by 100%. So like if you use Juggernaut and this together, you're going to have a really long evade cooldown. So it's going to be really long. Blood boiling. When your core skill overpowers an enemy, you spawn 3 volatile blood drops. Collecting volatile blood drops causes it to explode, dealing physical damage around you. Every 20 seconds, your next skill is guaranteed to overpower. So guarantee overpower once every 20 seconds. Hectic. This one is one I'm excited for the return of, which is for every 5 basic skills you cast, one of your active cooldowns is reduced by 2 to 4 seconds. This one basically allows most characters who have, basically a spammy basic skill and a relatively long cooldown to reset that cooldown, to have a way to reset that cooldown. It's very good for basic builds as well. Like basic builds in general get really good effectiveness out of this because they can spam their basic and then reset all their cooldowns, which helps them a ton as well. The Undying power is back, so the Life Leech, so casting skills will heal you for 0.5 to 2% of your life. This heals an additional 1% of life when you are below 50% life. So it basically works exactly like it did in the Season of the Vampire. And honestly, I think a lot of people use the Undying Power, but now that it is an aspect, it's going to be more of a question mark. You know, like, can I fit this into my build, essentially? Of the Moonrise, damaging an enemy with a basic skill grants you a 4% increased attack speed for 10 seconds, up to 5, stacking up to 5 times. Upon reaching maximum stacks, you enter a Vampiric Blood Rage, gaining 40 to 80% basic skill damage and a 15% movement speed for up to 10 seconds. Now, this one was a really great one, and I'm actually kind of happy this one came back too, because a lot of us that enjoyed the basic skill builds specifically, basic skill builds really like this. This is one of the like amazing basic skill build utilities. So a big win for the basic skill builds here, because of the Moonrise and Hectic are both extremely good for basic skill builds. And on top of that, Undying also works really good for basic skill builds too. Basically makes you kind of invincible because you can spam heals on yourself. Balance updates. Unique items. Ringing Star of the Skies now shows a buff on the bar while active. That's nice. Penitent Greaves, damage to chilled enemies has been increased from 7 to 10% to 12 to 15%. Pretty big buff there. Although damage to chilled enemies specifically, not exactly the best modifier since it only works against non-bosses. Tacits of the Dawning Sky, maximum resistance is increased from 6 to 10 to 8 to 12, so they gave the Tacits a buff. Honestly, I think that Tacits are, as a defensive piece of equipment, are not defensive enough. I know it sounds kind of silly, but their entire purpose is to be defensive, and they're not quite as defensive as they should be. Mother's Embrace, resource refund increased from 20 to 40% to 30 to 50%. Okay. That's a pretty big bump for Mother's Embrace. I think Mother's Embrace is definitely one of those rings that a lot of people don't use. Simply because it's too situational. It requires you to hit multiple monsters. It doesn't work on bosses, basically, because, of course, the boss is by itself. There's a lot of various things going on there that prevent the Mother's Embrace from really getting good effectiveness. So, I mean, a bump to it is definitely a good thing, in my opinion. Legendary aspects. Aspect of Inner Calm, maximum damage increased from 30 to 40%. So this will be a big boon to channeling skill users like Incinerate, the Lightning Storm, Druids, so forth and so on. Basically any class that stands still for a long period of time to get that maximum bonus. Of Retribution, stun chance increased from 8 to 10%. Damage to stunned enemies increased from 10 to 20 to 15 to 25%. Again, another situation where we're talking about a damage to a crowd-controlled monster. So again, something that doesn't apply to bosses. So a buff here is... It's interesting to consider this, is that they may be going in the wrong direction here, which is they don't understand that increasing the damage of these abilities doesn't necessarily make that big of a deal when they don't work on bosses. So it's not that the damage, it's not that these aspects are bad per se, it's that aspects like these are better because they apply to all damage and they apply to bosses as opposed to only applying to non-bosses. Which a lot of people are not, like, I've built tons of characters, and most of the characters have no problem dealing with trash, elites, just regular monsters in general. But these characters, like the ones that you set up like this with damage to stunned enemies and stuff like that, usually just have problems with bosses. Like, that's the only thing they have issues with. So upping their damage versus non-bosses doesn't do anything really to help them. It only helps them kill the monsters that they're already killing faster, which is silly. Starlight, amount of life healed needed for resource gain changed from 25 to 20%. Okay. This is the one where basically if you heal yourself, you gain resource back. But the problem with this one is that, it only counts health that you actually heal, not health that you heal over your maximum. So you actually have to get damaged, and then you have to heal yourself when you're damaged to make this trigger. And so that requires you to constantly get hurt on a regular basis and constantly heal yourself on a regular basis, which doesn't really work out as well as you would think in the grand scheme of things, because, you're a lot of the times if you have large amounts of heals, you're over-healing yourself constantly, which is fine, but over-heals don't count toward the total. Only actual heals count toward the total. So basically, it's this aspect is honestly just not really all that useful, and the buff they gave to it, although it's nice they gave it a buff, it's still not going to be really all that useful. Barbarian changes. Bash damage increased by 10%. Fury gain increased from 13 to 15. Battle Bash, additional Fury increased from 3 to 5. Additional Fury with two-handed weapons increased from 4 to 10. Wow. Frenzy. Frenzy damage increased by 10%. Nice buff there for Frenzy Barbarians. Flay damage increased by 10%. Fury increased. Gain increased from 13 to 15. Enhanced Flay, vulnerable duration increased from 2 to 3 seconds. Strategic Ground Stomp, ultimate cooldown reduction increased from 1 to 2 seconds. Cody's back there eating a plastic bag or something. Mm-hmm. That's right. I gave him the evil stare. He ain't like that. Strategic Ground Stomp, ultimate cooldown reduction increased from 1 to 2 seconds. Strategic Iron Flay, fortify amount increased from 15 to 20%. Prime of Call of Ancients, bonus damage increased from 10 to 20%. Passives. Endless Fury gain increased from 7, 14, 21 to 10, 20, and 30. Endless Fury. That one is... I mean, I guess that's just more Fury increase. I'm not sure if a lot of people actually use that one. I don't use that one on most of my builds because I do basic builds, but I remember which one it is. Paragon Executioner Glyph. Previous, while wielding a polearm, you deal 10% damage to healthy or injured enemies. Now, while wielding a polearm, you deal 10% increased damage. So they took away the situational there. Legendary aspects. Aspect of the Iron Warrior. Damage reduction increased from 18 to 28 to 25 to 35%. Unique items. Goer's Devastating Grips. Ranks to Whirlwind increased from 2 to 3 to 3 to 4. Damage increased from 16 to 26% to 25 to 35%. Druid changes. Earth Spike, Spirit Regeneration increased from 13 to 16, and damage increased by 10%. I actually really like Earth Spike. I built a couple characters around Earth Spike, and it's actually kind of fun. Enhanced Earth Spike, chance to stun increased from 10 to 15%. Fierce Earth Spike, Fortify amount increased from 8 to 12. Oh, nice. One of the good things about Earth Spike is that basically it doesn't matter where you are, you can hit basically anything with it, because it's not an ability that travels to the target. It's an ability that just simply appears underneath of the target, which is a lot different than the way that a lot of the other abilities work in the game. And because it just appears underneath of the target, it's a very fun one to play around with. And I honestly, I've built an entire character around it before, utilizing Nature's Fury, Earth Spike, and then Earth Spike casting me free Wind Shear and the other basic skill that I can't remember the name of right off the top of my head. And then we got Wind Shear changes. Spirit Generation increased from 14 to 16. Damage increased by 10%. Wild Wind Shear, additional spirit per enemy hit increased from 3 to 4. Claw. Wow, Claw gets a buff. Spirit Generation increased from 12 to 15. Damage increased by 15%. Fierce Claw damage increased by 30%. Maul. Spirit Generation increased from 17 to 20. Damage increased by 10%. Enhanced Maul fortifying amount increased from 3 to 5%. Max life. Wild Maul knockdown duration increased from 1.5 to 2. Wolves passive damage increased by 30%. Active damage increased by 45%. Poisoning and Creeper passive damage increased by 30%. Active damage increased by 40%. Ravens passive damage increased by 30%. Active damage increased by 20%. So buff across the board to the companions. It's really interesting here because they've got quite a few buffs to the Barbarian basics and the Druid basics. Then we also have the Moonrise coming back, the Hectic power coming back, the Undying power coming back. This could very well lead to all the basics builds coming back, like a lot of the basic, like Frenzy Barbarians, Flay Barbarians, even the the Lunging Strike Barbarians. There's a lot of ways that you can make basic classes as well as the Druids. So like the Druid Earthspike build that I ran in Season 2. There's also the Claw buff here, which Claw has never been bad, so like that just beefs up the basic Claw Druid considerably, and then you can also tag it in the Moonrise and all the other powers. So the basic Druid has gotten a buff considerably. I'm not really sure the basic Druid needed a buff, but they got it. Passives, Quick Shift. Damage bonus increased from 5, 10, 15 to 7, 14, 21. Bestial Rampage damage bonus while in Werebear form increased from 30 to 50%. Ursine Strength damage and overpowered damage bonuses increased from 25 to 30%. Perfect Storm damage bonus increased from 15% to 20. So just damage bonuses across the board going on here for the Druid. Seismic Shift. Previous Earthspike launches in a line has a 2 to 1 second cooldown. New Earthspike gains a 30 to 50% bonus damage, launches a spike in a line, and has a 2 to 1 second cooldown. So they gave it a 50% bonus damage. This one is this aspect has always been a little weird to me. It's interesting, but it's weird. I'm not really sure why they put the cooldown on it. I feel like there's much more broken abilities within the game, and putting a cooldown on it, I think, just kind of ruins the aspect. I thought for a second there they were going to remove the cooldown, but they didn't. I was talking about Earthspike earlier being a really interesting skill, and I guess they're decided that Earthspike needs some love. Unique items. Storm's Companion, Ranks of Wolves has been increased from 2 to 3 to 3 to 4. What I'd really like to see them do with this, and I hate to be nitpicky because they're buffing it up a little bit here, but I'd really like to see them make Storm's Companion increase the number of wolves. There's no reason for an item like this, which is focused around the wolves, to not give you more wolves. Like, it should just give you an additional wolf as well, like as a bonus effect. Because the whole entire point of a companion druid is to have like an army, and while having more ranks in wolves is certainly interesting, having more wolves would be more interesting than having more ranks in wolves, just having an additional wolf. Storm Howl damage increased by 180%. Now, I tested this previously, and I'm not exactly sure how much this is going to be now. I could always run another test when the patch goes live. But judging by the numbers that they gave, like from the before and the after, it looked like about 100% increase from their measly 180 lightning damage to their like 1,100. But my druid, when I tested these on the video, I think I have a video up of the Storm Howl pants, and during the video I tested them with my druid, and I was able to get a much more interesting setup. Let me see here. I could probably bring up my video. Okay, here we go. So here they are playing around with the training dummy, and see if I've got the actual Storm Howl pants on. So I was getting about 15k with a storm setup. So specifically a storm setup, you could see that was like a 15k crit. If I'm getting 15k before, and they went up by a pretty considerable amount. Like they went from literally 180 to 11,000 on their video. So 180 to 11,000 pre-buff to buff. So I'm getting about 11k right now, and if you use the same multiplier that they got, that probably brings me up to about 100,000. I could be, averaging it wrong, but it sounds to me like about 100,000 damage per lightning bolt now. And I know that doesn't quite compute, but judging by their numbers that they showed, which is, let's see here. I believe they had a picture, although it might not be in their campfire chat. No. Hey, it was on the campfire chat yesterday, though. And then in the picture, it was very obvious that the buff was a lot more than what they were stating. Either that, or they just fixed the way the ability worked in general. All right, so Necromancer, moving on. Skeletal Warrior, damage increased by 30%, life increased by 10%. Skeletal Reaper, damage increased by 20%, life increased by 10%. Frost Mage, damage increased by 20%, life increased by 10%. Skeleton Shadow Mage, damage increased by 20%, life increased by 10%. Skeleton Sacrifice Mage, damage increased by 20%, life increased by 10%. Golem, basic attack damage increased by 30%, life increased by 20%. So as you can see here, pretty much a 30 to 20%, or 20 to 30% increase across the board on all of the Necromancer minions. This is in addition to other buffs to the Necromancer minions as well, and we'll go over some of those later. Skills, Blood Surge, damage bonus per enemy drained reduced from 10% times to 5% times. Nova damage increased by 40%. The goals of this change are to reduce the opportunity cost of using Blood Surge against fewer numbers of enemies, as well as increasing its overall power, even in scenarios of hitting multiple enemies. Supernatural Blood Surge damage bonus increased from 20 to 30%. Sever outgoing damage increased by 6.5%. Returning damage increased by 20%. Enhanced Sever damage increased by 40% to 75% of Sever's initial damage. Paranormal Sever vulnerable duration increased from 2 to 3 seconds. Blight impact damage increased by 33.3%, and damage over time increased by 10.5%. Paranormal Blight immobilize duration increased from 1.5 to 2.5 seconds. Supernatural Blight bonus damage increased from times 15 to times 20%. I believe that's the one that's for minions, isn't it? Specifically, let's look that up real quick. Supernatural Blight. Your minions, yeah, that's a minion buff. So that's a 5% times minion buff as well. So that's what I'm saying is, like, in addition to other buffs. So if you have Blight on the target, you used to get a 15% times multiplier for your minions. Now you're getting a 20% times multiplier for your minions. So not only did they beef up the base damage of the minions, but now they're also giving additional multipliers that you can obtain in the tree. Looks like it might be the season of the minion. Corpse Explosion, damage increased by 21.5. Plagued Corpse Explosion, damage bonus increased by 8 to 10%. So Corpse Explosion buffs, that's pretty interesting. Enhanced Bone Prison, previous enemies inside Bone Prison are vulnerable. New enemies inside Bone Prison, when cast, are made vulnerable for 8 seconds. Huh. So instead of I think that's a good change, because when the Bone Prison gets destroyed really quickly by the enemies, it doesn't really help. So this one just makes it so that whenever you cast Bone Prison on enemies, if they're inside the Bone Prison when the Bone Prison is cast, they're made vulnerable for 8 seconds. That's pretty nice. Blood Wave, damage increased by 25%. Death's Approach, name changed from Death's Reach. So this is the thing that they were talking about on the campfire chat, where they took away basically the distant damage from this passive. Honestly, distant damage isn't really all that amazing anyway. Instead, we're going to gain 4, 8, 12 movement speed, which is actually sorely needed for the Necromancer, because dang, we slow. Like, we so slow. Spiked armor gaining 0.3 thorns at the maximum, and now it's gaining 0.3. What? Oh, and 15% additional armor. Okay. I don't know why they added the 0 in there. It made it look like they changed something, but they didn't change anything, because the 0 before the decimal point means nothing if it's a 0. There's a 0 before this decimal point too, but they just didn't write it in there. I don't know why they wrote it in there. So just an additional 15% armor with the thorns. That's rather interesting. Death's Embrace, damage reduction from close enemies increased to 12%. Wow. Hellbent Commander, damage bonus increased from times 30% to times 45%. So Hellbent Commander is another one for the minions. It's basically like when you're with your minions. Let me see if I can pull this up real quick. So your minions deal percent times increased damage while you are close to them. So as long as you are within close distance of your minions, they get a multiplier. So basically, this is another 15% increase. So if you guys are running a tally, we've got a 15% increase here. We've got a 5% increase back. We also have the 30% to 20 to 30% base increase for the minions. So we're getting a lot here. Cult Leader Legendary Node bonus minion damage per 20% attack speed increased from 10 to 15%. So this one right here is a pretty big buff, and it has to do with the fact that the way that the Cult Leader Paragon node works now. So let me see if I can pull up the Cult Leader Paragon node. So the Cult Leader Paragon node is your minions deal 10% times increased damage for each 20% bonus of attack speed that they have, right? So there's a lot of different ways that you can get an attack speed, but the minions can easily go over like a huge amount of attack speed. One of them is the Frenzied Dead. There's also another one that has to do with the Army of the Dead. That one gives like 200% and 300% if you put it on an amulet. And then you can get like another like 100% from various other sources. So just as an example, let me show you what this increase would look like. So let's assume that you had like 400% increased attack speed for your minions. Well, you divide that by 20, and that's going to get you 20. So we have 20 total. Then we take that 20 and we multiply it by 10, which was the original amount, which would have been a 200% times multiplier. However, if we take the new one and we multiply that by 15, we now have a 300% multiplier. So we have now gone up basically another 100% from the additional 5% that we're gaining here. And for those of you in the crowd who are keeping track, that's a 100% plus a 15 plus a 5, which is about 120% times multiplier increase for the minions. And then on top of that, we also have the base increase, which this will be multiplying the base. So, yeah. They also beefed up this one a little bit too, which is also really interesting. So Corporeal Glyph, previous additional bonus, you and your minions deal 10% increased physical damage. However, now they changed it to you and your minions deal 10% increased physical damage, and you also gain 1% movement speed for each active minion. Which, from what I can tell, if you do like the maximum minion count, which is I think it's 13. I could be wrong. That's basically a 13% increase in movement speed. Because you can have, it really depends on how you set up your minions. But you do have the extra minion you can gain from the Skeletal Warriors, and then you can get 2 or 3 from the aspects, so you can get extra minions there, depending on whether you put that on a two-handed or an amulet, etc. Which even if you just do the 2 and the 2, it still ends up to be a lot of additional movement speed. It's definitely not something that like you'd want to build specifically just for the movement speed, but if you're building the minions anyway and you're going with a max minion build, well, now you get movement speed for being a max minion build, so that's certainly not terrible. Legendary aspects of the Hardened Bone damage reduction also applies to the player in addition to their minions. So this one's really interesting. The aspect of the Hardened Bones is a let me see here. I remember what it is, but let's get it up on the screen so we can take a look at it. So while you have 7 or more minions, your minions gain a 10 to 20% increased damage reduction. So this applying to you as well as your minions means that you're going to be able to use this as a defensive aspect for your Necromancer as well. Which is really, really nice. So you can get a 20% damage reduction there. You could also potentially put that on an amulet to bring that up to a 30% damage reduction, or even put it on a two-hander. Well, actually, not. Well, you could put it on a shield. You can't put it on a two-hander, but you can put it on your shield as well. So this is a way that you can basically just get a nice flat damage reduction for having minions out, which is certainly very good. That this applying to the Necromancer is huge, because a lot of the times you would have to choose between making your minions tanking or making yourself tanky. And this is going to help both of you. Blood-bathed aspect, damage of the blood surge echoes changed from 60 to 50% less damage to 10 to 30% less damage. Okay. That's actually a buff. That's a buff. Sorcerer, Incinerate buffs. They talked about these in the campfire chat. They said they had a bunch of Incinerate buffs. So damage has been increased by 40%. Enhanced Incinerate, damage of burn radius increased from 25 to 50%. Destructive Incinerate, enemy damage reduced, amount increased from 25 to 30%. Greater Incinerate, immobilized duration increased from 1 to 1.5 seconds. Hydra damage increased by 15%, and ball lightning damage increased by 10%. Icy Veil's passive barrier duration increased from 5 to 8%. That's a pretty nice one to make the barriers basically permanent. Snap Freeze, lucky hit chance increased from 3 to 5%. Soulfire, previous, after standing still for 1.5 seconds, your pyromancy skills cost 5, 10, or 15% less mana. New, your pyromancy skills cost 4% less mana and deal 2% increased damage. Double these bonuses after standing still for 2 seconds. So after 2 seconds, you get 8% less mana, which is a nerf from the 15% that it currently cost. And then there was no increase in damage before. So now you get a 2% and then a 4% increase in damage after standing still for 2 seconds. I mean, I can see what they're trying to do here. They're trying to add more damage to the Inferno skill. I don't like that they kind of nerfed the mana cost reduction there. Avalanche, damage increased from 40 to 45%. Shocking Impact, damage increased by 33%. Okay. Paragon, Frostbite Glyph, damage reduction increased from 13 to 15%. Okay. Invocation Glyph, damage reduction stacks increased from 12% to 15%. Stalagmite Glyph, critical strike chance increased from 10 to 20%. Enchanter Glyph, damage per 5 intelligence purchased in range increased from 1.3 to 2%, maxing out at 10. Conjurer Glyph, damage per intelligence purchased in range increased from 2.6 to 3%, maxing out at 15. Unleash Glyph, damage and management regeneration increased from 6.7 to 7%. Legendary aspects of the Searing Wards, mana cost reduced from 100 to 200 to 75 to 125. It's a pretty big reduction. Of Overwhelming Currents, chance increased from 10 to 20 to 15 to 30%. That's the one that gives you the free casts of your unstable currents, right? If I'm remembering correctly. So that's a pretty big bonus, a 10% increase in the unstable current casts. I thought of Overwhelming Currents was a pretty widely used one there. I'm kind of a little confused. I thought that one was already pretty widely used. Maybe it just needed a little bit of a buff. I don't know. Rogue Heartseeker, attack speed increased by 20%, which is good because it was always way too slow. Dev note, lower the power interrupt frames from 20 to 16. Power interrupt frames. Forceful Arrow, attack speed increased by 20%, lower the power interrupt frames from... What the hell is a power interrupt frame? That's the first time I've ever heard that term for Diablo 4. Power interrupt frame? Never heard that before. I guess it's some sort of stagger mechanic, maybe? Maybe it's a stagger mechanic. Like, causes the monster to, like, reel back slightly or something? I don't know. So that's a new term from the developers, and I've been looking at all the patch notes. I've never seen that before. Flurry, damage increased by 10%. Improved Flurry. Previous, if a Flurry hits a vulnerable enemy, it makes all enemies hit by that cast vulnerable for 3 seconds. New, Flurry deals 20% times increased damage to vulnerable enemies, and if Flurry hits any vulnerable enemy, it will make all enemies hit by that cast vulnerable for 3 seconds. That's interesting. Just a straight damage bonus, basically. Advanced Flurry, previous, evading through an enemy will cause your next Flurry to stun enemies for 2.5 seconds. New, evading through an enemy causes your next flurry to deal 30% times increased damage and stun enemies for 2.5 seconds. They really want people to try out flurry. That's all. That's what I'm seeing there. Please try out flurry. That's what they say. Rapid fire, damage increased by 10%. Rain of arrows, damage increased by 10%. Passives, precision stacks required for bonuses reduced from 6 to 4. Infusion, glyph, cooldown reduction increased from 0.5 to 1 second. Legendary aspects of the encircling blades damage bonus increased from 15% to 22. Of the branching volleys, which is the barrage one, they talked about this one on stream. They basically added an 80% increased damage, and then they increased the percent chance to split from 25 to 60% chance, which honestly, it really kind of needed it because it wasn't really a very good aspect. Shadow Slicer, damage increased from 80 to 100% base damage to 200 to 300% base damage. Eagle Horn changes, damage bonus increased from 40% to 60%. Eyes in the Dark, Death Trap bonus increased from 50% to 70%. I don't think I'm ever putting on Eyes in the Dark pants, even if I do a Death Trap build, by the way. But it's nice to see them working on this unique. Maybe in the future they'll eventually get it right. Writhing Maid of Trickery, cooldown to summon a Shadow Decoy reduced from 12 to 10 seconds, and Shadow Decoy damage increased by 20%. The Seneschal changes. We want the Seneschal to feel strong, but there are certain powers that are overperforming. Additionally, there are a couple of unintended interactions that are being addressed. Poison Support. Poison Support no longer reapplies the construct's damage bonuses when it spreads, matching the functionality of the other damage over time tuning stones. Bleeding Support. Bonus bleeding damage from 20% to 10. Burning Support, bonus critical strike damage from 20 to 10, bonus critical strike damage per skill rank from 2 to 1. Tempest. Tempest no longer gains bonus damage and duration when it's reapplied or when it spreads. Apparently there was some sort of bug where Tempest was kind of like just repeatedly gaining bonus damage and duration every single time it spread or something, stacking that damage bonus and duration like as it spread between targets. So apparently it was getting a little bit of an unintended effect. Hopefully they didn't nerf it too bad because I really like the Tempest on my Seneschal. User interface and user experience. Player profiles updated. Players' equipped skills are now displayed in their profile. Equipped emblems are now displayed in the head of the player profiles. The applied cosmetic name and where it was earned from are displayed in the tooltips of the items that are being transmogged. From Edit Profile, players can select seals from those they earned during the current week to display on their profile header and social card. The current character's time played is displayed at the bottom of the profile. They're talking about like character profiles in Diablo 4, which I'm not even sure how to access those. The cost to craft Uber items has reduced from 5 Resplendent Sparks to 4. Bug fixes. Fixed an issue where the Seneschal gained double the benefit from skills that benefit allies, such as Barbarian's Warcry or Druid's Bloodhowl. Fix an issue where an attack that swaps from melee to crossbow would double the bonuses from the Precision and Weapon Mastery Rogue passives. Okay. Fix an issue where some interactable objects associated with various quests, such as Leiden's Stash during the discretionary spending quest, cannot be interacted with while mounted. Fix an issue where the camera would not reset if the player died during the Echo of Lilith encounter while the camera was zoomed out. Fixed an issue where the Juggernaut aspect didn't apply armor while the player was mounted. Oh, okay. So riding your horse was a little dangerous. Fixed an issue where the guaranteed overpower granted by Druid's Enhanced Pulverize did not apply immediately after acquiring 12 stacks. Fixed an issue where the Necromancer's Skeleton Reaper's chance to create corpses was based on lucky hit instead of a flat percentage. Fixed an issue where Bone Splinters cast from the Shattered Spirit aspect didn't receive the vulnerable effect granted by the Initiate's Bone Splinter. Ooh, big buff for my Bone Spirit Necromancer. Fixed an issue where Thorns was not consistent when applying Lucky Hit. EX Thorns could trigger Abhorrent Decrepify, but not Hewed Flesh. Fixed an issue where the Cult Leader Legendary Paragon node didn't properly give bonus damage based on bonus minion attack speed. Well, that's... Every time they add one of these buffs and then I see a line like that, I'm like, well, thanks for giving us a buff that didn't work. And then we used that buff that didn't work and wondered why it wasn't working. And now then we see the patch notes and we're like, oh, so it just wasn't working. Okay. Well, never mind then. Fixed an issue where the rotting aspect wouldn't spawn additional corpses. Fixed an issue where the Sorcerer's Frigid Fate and Elemental Summoner legendary Paragon effects did not work properly with the aspect of the elements. Fixed an issue where the Fiery Surge passive was not granting as much mana regeneration as it should have. Fixed an issue where bonus damage from the enhanced Caltrops could apply more often than intended when stacking multiple casts of Caltrops on the same enemy. Fixed an issue where enhanced Caltrops was dealing less damage than expected to bosses. Some items, legendary aspects, passives, paragon bonuses, and skills displayed bugs that allowed players to gain more power than intended when you equipped and then unequipped them. We believe these interactions lead to a worse experience for all players, as it creates a stigma that these bugs must be exploited to reach new levels of power. The bug fixes below address all known instances of this issue. Fixed an issue with multiple legendary aspects, where equipping duplicate aspects would always apply the effect of the first equipped aspect, ignoring the rule of applying only the strongest equipped aspect. Fixed an issue with multiple, where equipping duplicate aspects would always apply the effect of the first equipped aspect, ignoring the rule of applying only the strongest equipped aspect. That's an interesting way of snapshotting some stuff. Fixed an issue where unlearning Veer's Mastery with the Mage Lord's aspect equipped would cause the Veer's Mastery aspect to remain active. I knew about this one. This was one of the ways that the Ball Lightning Sorceresses were capable of doing the Abattoir of Zeer back in Season 2. It had to do with basically them getting the Veer's Mastery and the Mage Lord's aspect. Basically bonuses active, even though you didn't have the Veer's Mastery active, so then you would go to another one of the key passives. Fix an issue where a power that grants a bonus stat based on another stat would not readjust after the temporary bonus wore off. So snapshotting is an issue because basically what it does is it creates a situation where like the top 1% of the players are basically exploiting this to reach higher numbers over other players that are not exploiting this. And if you don't know how to do the exploit, if you don't know how the snapshotting effects work, well then you weren't ever going to reach those heights. Not because you weren't skilled enough, not because your gear wasn't good enough, not because you didn't have your character set up properly, but just simply because you didn't know the bug that other people were exploiting, which I think is a really stupid way to do things. So I'm glad that they're finally fixing this and addressing it. User interface and user experience. Fixed an issue where editing your profile could also trigger the prompt for adding a friend. Fixed an issue where the description of enhanced Caltrops was missing the damage cap. Fixed an issue where the Hedum and Quest Giver NPCs for the Guardian of the Pit would disappear when HellTide was active in the area. Various performances, UI, visual, and stability improvements. So let's go back over these real quick. We'll do a quick recap, and I'll talk about some of the changes. So first off, we've got the vampiric powers coming back, and I think a lot of people are excited about these. I'm personally excited about the Of the Moonrise. I'm personally very excited about the Hectic power. And the Undying power. I know a lot of you are excited about Metamorphosis, but to be perfectly honest with you, I don't really care about this one. Most classes have tons of ways to become unstoppable, and I never really cared about it. There are some classes that I'm very happy about this coming back for, though, like the Necromancer, which has absolutely no way of becoming unstoppable. The Necromancer is one of the few classes in the game that literally has no unstoppable, like, at all, with the exception of Blood Mist. And so it's nice it's nice to have an option to not be tied to Blood Mist. So the Necromancer, for the first time in Season 3, is going to have an option other than being tied to Blood Mist. The rest of these, though, I mean, it's honestly very nice to have this one back because of the basic skill connotations. In fact, it's a very good time to be a basic skill user because with Of the Moonrise coming back and Hectic, and then on top of that, we also have the basic buffs for the Barbarian and the basic buffs for the Druid, both of which are going to make basic skill builds come to life again. So if you're very interested in setting up a Frenzy Barbarian or a Lunging Strike Barbarian, or maybe you're running a Claw, Storm Strike, maybe you got the old Staff of the Crone, and you're running that build, this is going to enhance those builds considerably. So if you are using any of the basic skill builds for Barbarian or Druid, or honestly any basic skill builds in general, like even just a sorceress basic skill build. The Hectic and the Moonrise powers are absolutely insane for basic skill builds, so you might want to see if you can work those in somehow. Barbarian didn't really see a lot of nerfs or anything. There were definitely some interesting buffs in here for damage reduction and things like that. It seems like they're trying to move people back to Whirlwind as well. Um, they did make some changes to some of the unique items and the legendary aspects. They all seem relatively good, to be perfectly honest. I'm not sure if like this one is going to make people want to use Mother's Embrace. I mean, this one is literally just showing you the buff on the bar so you can actually see it. This Inner Calm buff is a pretty huge buff, but it's only for characters that stand still, and it's pretty difficult to stand still in Diablo 4 due to all the ground-based effects, so this one's really only going to be useful for those characters that have to stand still, like Incinerate and Stormstrike Druids. Those of you who are using your channeling skills that you're forcing to stand still, well, you got a nice little 10% buff there. This one, I talked about this one before, but I don't think anyone's using that one still. The Ring of the Starlight just doesn't work properly. Druid did get some interesting changes besides the basic skill buffs, which was the companion skill buffs, which were really neat. Also, a pretty big buff to the quick shift passive from 15 to 21%. So, quick shift is a damage bonus that every time you shift between two forms, you get a damage increase, and it works pretty well. It doesn't just require you to change between werewolf and werebear. It also works between like werewolf and like human and werebear, and so forth and so on. So it's actually a pretty nice one to have for a druid that's shifting a lot between different forms. They also beefed up the Bestial Rampage bonus from the werebear. And the Ursine Strength, which was also a pretty big one too. Honestly, a lot of damage buffs across the board for Druid, and also resource generation increases across the board for Druid and also Barbarian. And then the Necromancer. Honestly, the Necromancer got some pretty massive buffs to the minions. Not only did the Necromancer get a 20 to 30% flat damage increase across all of his minions, warriors, mages, and golems, he also got a 5% increase on the blight bonus, which was pretty nice. So a 5% multiplier on increase for supernatural blight. There's also a 15% increase on the Hellbent commander. And then on top of that, there's also the Cult Leader legendary node apparently was fixed to work properly, and now it's also been increased to 15%, which, when in combination with a lot of the other things, adds up to a pretty significant bonus damage for the Minion Mancer. So for those of you who are having fun doing Minion Necromancers, now might be the time to hop on and give it another try. On top of this, they also gave the Necromancer some pretty significant bonuses to movement speed. As you guys are well aware, the Necromancer has been one of the slowest classes with the least number of movement speed, or what would you call it? Just ways to traverse around the battlefield. You know, they don't have teleport, they don't have leap, they don't have like a charge or anything like that. But now they have a couple different bonuses for movement speed. They have the new Death's Embrace, which is being changed to movement speed. Or not Death's Embrace, Death's Approach right here, Death's Approach, which is going to be 12% increased movement speed, which is pretty nice. They're also going to give us another movement speed bonus for having minions out, so you're going to get another movement speed bonus on top of that one. So minions are going to be running around pretty darn fast. Or necromancers are going minion mancers are going to be running around pretty darn fast. Also a damage reduction buff there for the Death's Embrace from 9% to 12%. Which is nice. I think I always use Death's Embrace on my Necromancers. Sorceress, I mean, it's minor changes. They definitely increased a lot to Incinerate. And on top of that, they also increased the Inner Sight, which was the standing still thing, which also increases Incinerate some as well. Small buffs to Hydra and Ball Lightning as well. And then on top of that, they also have changed the Soulfire passive so that it gives you more increased damage. Again, another buff for Incinerate. And I guess they're really trying to get people to use Incinerate. I actually played an Incinerate Sorceress. It wasn't that bad. In this season, I'm not entirely sure. I haven't played it in this season, but it does look like it's stronger than it was last season. So it certainly has its own panache, standing still in the middle of an arena and just shooting a giant flame of fire across everything. They definitely gave some damage reduction increases here on the Paragon board, and then they also seem to have beefed up the Enchanter and the Conjurer glyph as well as a little bit of more regeneration there from the Unleash glyph. The overall, I mean, it seems like the Sorceress changes are pretty minor, although definitely still there. I mean, there's definitely some buffs. It's mainly buffs. The Rogue, they tried their best to make Heartseeker and Forceful Arrow interesting to use. I've tried to use them on several occasions, and it just always feels like Heartseeker and Forceful Arrow are just inferior. And I think it's mainly due to their attack speed as well, and I kind of always felt that, and so it's nice to see them increase the attack speed of both of the abilities. I'm not sure if it's going to be enough, but I guess we'll find out. Flurry, they really want people to use Flurry on the Rogue as well, so they've done a lot of changes to Flurry, and they also increased one of the Flurry legendary aspects as well. It basically they're just they I guess they just realize that nobody's using Flurry, and they want people to try and use it. Rain of Arrows got a small buff, and Rapid Fire got a small buff as well, which was interesting. Precision got a pretty huge buff, which is basically that. So when you build Precision, you have to build 6 stacks, and then once you build the 6th stack, and then you fire off that 7th hit, and it does a pretty decent amount of damage. Well, they changed it to 4, so now you only have to build 4 stacks, and then you get the same bonus at the top of the stack. So reducing the number of stacks required for the bonuses means that it's going to be active more often, and it's going to be a more smooth experience in terms of like getting the precision bonuses. So the precision buff, this is a buff here. So precision has gotten quite a nice buff. Overall, most of the changes here are good. Like the branching volleys change. I think that barrage aspect was pretty garbage before. So now that it's been enhanced, it's definitely a hell of a lot better now than it was before. And I'm assuming that if you throw this on a two-hander at this point with the 40 to 60%, or sorry, from 40 to 60 to 80. So 80% chance to ricochet. I mean, on a two-hander, that would probably be well over 100. Same thing for the barrage, as a 60% chance to split into 2 arrows. So it could be interesting to see how that performs on a two-hander. Damage bonus to Eaglehorn, damage bonus to Eyes in the Dark. I mean, a lot of this stuff is rather simple. I kind of hate to see just damage bonuses across the board, especially when they're trying to balance things. I like to see things balanced in more interesting ways, but I guess if something's really underperforming and they just feel like they need to add extra damage, it's not terrible. The Seneschal barely got touched at all, to be honest. It looks like they really just fixed a bunch of bugs. And then on top of the bugs that they fixed, they also decreased a little bit of the performance of some of the skills. The only one I'm really worried about is Tempest, because I'm not exactly sure how that's going to affect the way that works. Apparently they did some work with the player profiles. This has to do with the leaderboards, by the way, if you're unaware. So with the leaderboards, when you place on the leaderboards, people will be able to click on you on the leaderboards and see your character that you completed the leaderboards on. It won't freeze your character in time at that particular moment. It'll actually just show your character, whatever it is right this moment. But basically, when it comes to this particular thing, they're just trying to get it ready for the leaderboards, it looks like, which is really all this is about. And this change of crafting the Uber Uniques from 5 to 4, like I actually didn't want them to change it, because I don't want people just crafting up any Uber Unique they want. The whole point of them is supposed to be a little bit rare. But reducing it from 5 to 4 doesn't really change much, which I'm perfectly fine with. It just makes it a little bit more accessible to the people who are having really bad luck, or really good luck, whichever way you want to see it. I mean, if you find the same Uber Unique like 5 times in a row, is that good luck or is that bad luck? You decide. There was a couple bug fixes in here, like the Seneschal having unintended side effects with Barb's Warcry and Druid's Blood Howl. Apparently some sort of bug going on where attacks that were swapping between melee to crossbow would double the bonuses from the precision and weapon mastery rogue passives. I'm pretty sure I saw a couple videos of people taking advantage of this, so it looks like that's gone. Although, you know, every time I say looks like that's gone, I have to like stop here for a second and say this. They have made patch notes on many occasions saying they fixed something, only to find out that they haven't fixed it. And so I have to take all these with a grain of salt now, because it feels like the Diablo 4 developers keep telling us they fix things, but then not actually fixing them. So did they fix it? Question mark. Fixed an issue where some interactable. Let's see how long there was another one in here. This one right here, the Juggernaut being not applied while you were mounted. That's kind of hilarious. There was a couple other ones here, like the Reapers not spawning their corpses properly based on flat percentage, which I like. This one right here is pretty huge for those of us who've been playing Bone Spirit Necromancers. Is that like this wasn't triggering, and I was kind of mad at this, and I thought maybe it was just because they didn't want that working with the aspect, but apparently it was supposed to be working with the aspect, but it wasn't. So now when you shoot out that big nova of Bone Splinters, you will get the vulnerable effect from the Initiate's Bone Splinter. So actually pretty nice. That's going to be a pretty huge buff for the Bone Spirit Necromancer, because then now we're going to make the entire screen vulnerable basically all the time, which is certainly very nice. This one, this is literally an example of exactly what I'm talking about. So I talked earlier about them fixing things, and then come to find out later they didn't actually fix anything. So they added the Cult Leader Paragon node to give damage bonus based on bonus minion attack speed. Right? Well then, now 1.33 comes along. We've been playing the game for what? You know, I don't know, like what? How long has it been since Season 3 launched? Like, it's been a while, right? And then this patch comes out, and they're like, oh, yeah, Cult Leader Paragon node wasn't working properly. We know we told you that we changed it so that it gave you a bonus damage based on your minion attack speed, but it wasn't actually. So, yeah. And I see this so often in Diablo 4 patch notes, and I have to be very critical about this, extremely critical. If you are going to add a feature, make sure it freaking works. I almost cursed. Make sure it works. Like, why are you adding features that aren't working? You're just bamboozling the player base at that point. You're like, hey guys, here's a fountain. If you click on the fountain, you get free gold. Everybody goes to click on the fountain. There's no gold. Patch 1.32 comes out. Hey guys, we know we said that when you click on this fountain, you're going to get free gold. But there was a bug that when you clicked on the fountain, you wouldn't get free gold. And we fixed the bug. You can click on the fountain and get free gold now. I'm like, well, thanks. We've been clicking on the fountain for like a year for no free gold. Oh, it works now. Thank you. Appreciate it. Can I have my 10 million clicks back? I'm sure I'm trying. Apparently there was some sort of issue where enhanced caltrops was applying more damage when it was stacked multiple times on the enemy. I don't remember this at all, by the way. I've tried it. I tried it at the beginning of the season, never had an issue, or never had this wonderful thing happen to me. Never. So I don't really know what the hell they're talking about here. I literally would stack my caltrops on a boss like multiple times. But then right here it says fixed an issue where enhanced caltrops was dealing less damage than expected to bosses. So like I guess this was only working on elite monsters is what it was, and so it was not working on bosses. So this didn't work on bosses, so it didn't really even matter. And the bosses were taking less damage than they were supposed to. And and this is another example, just another example of them telling us that they have something going, right? So this was in 1.3 or 1 point whatever when the season went live. They're like, we're beefing up caltrops. Caltrops is going to do more damage. It's going to be big. It's going to be a big caltrops. It's going to be so amazing. It's going to be the most amazing caltrops you've ever seen. Everybody should use caltrops. Caltrops stonks up, right? And then everybody tries out caltrops, and then it's not working right? Just another example of like them telling us that something is in the game, and then we go in the game to test it, and then it doesn't work, and then later on we find out that it wasn't working properly. So this one here is a big win across the board. I do not like anything in the game that is not inherently apparent to someone who is playing the game. So if you're playing the game and you can't figure this stuff out yourself without going to a YouTube video to like learn the special sequence of events that you have to do to achieve snapshotting, then like it doesn't belong in the game. And so this being fixed, the snapshotting stuff being fixed, is a big win across the board for Diablo 4. I think a lot of people are going to appreciate this. I know I do. I am one of those people who does not take advantage of snapshotting. I know it exists. I know how to do it, but I personally think that it is bad manners, specifically, very bad manners. It would be the worst of manners, right? Like it would be like me coming into a PvP engagement with a completely hacked character, with just like every single item I have on is like broken hacked from some sort of like hero editor program, and then I've got like 100 all skills and just like 10 trillion health. Like this is basically how I see this. If you were exploiting these, if you were using these at any point, you are no worse than someone who is using a cheat program in the game at that point. You're basically doing is cheating the game and having an unfair advantage over other players who are not cheating the game. So this being gone is a 100% amazing thing. And hopefully, as I talked about earlier, when they tell us things are gone and they don't actually disappear, let's hope that they actually are gone and that they're not just bamboozling us. Like, we fixed it, guys. We did. We promise we fixed it. You get in the game, it's not fixed. You're like, hey, we know you said you fixed it, but it's not fixed. Like, can you check again? They're like, well, we did fix this issue, but there's a couple more that we forgot to they did say all known instances of the issue, though, which is rather interesting. So I guess if there's other snapshotting instances that they're not aware of, we're going to have to like report it to their attention to make sure that they understand what's going on. This actually is going to decrease the power of quite a few characters. So if you guys were unaware, like back in season 2 when like the druid hit like a 1 trillion damage hit, and like the barbarians were hitting like the numbers like way off what anyone else could ever achieve, and people were posting these screenshots of insane damage pumps, it was usually due to snapshotting. Like that's usually how they were achieving these goals, with snapshotting. So a lot of those really ridiculous damage numbers are going to disappear. I think that's pretty much it. There's not much more to go over here, and I want to go play some Diablo 2 because I want to get back to Season 6. For those of you who are unaware, we actually found a 2020 Sork Torch, which was exceedingly valuable. I went ahead and tried to figure out how much it was worth, and I came up with a number of about 30 burr runes. That's about how many burr runes it was worth, about 30. So I gave it to Squiddy. I just let Squiddy decide what to do with it. Squiddy traded it off and actually got us 30 Jaw runes. So we have 30 Jaw runes in the kinship right now that we're going to be able to use for essentially whatever we need. We're going to obviously disseminate a lot of that across the kinship, so it's not going to go to like me or anyone specifically, because farming the torch was a group effort. Can't breathe. Farming the torch was a group effort, and we all farmed keys, and also on top of that, we were doing an 8-player Ubers at the time, which means everybody who was there was accountable for creating that torch. If you guys are unaware, we recently discovered that the number of items in the game directly determines the rolls on the item. So the 2020 torch was a direct result of having multiple players there, which was rather interesting. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals joining me for these little patch note videos. I know Diablo 2 is still in full swing, and I'd rather be playing that right now. But when the leaderboards do come out, I'll be hopping back on to check out the leaderboards. As always, thanks for watching, and keep watching.